The Chancellor's autumn statement had a distinctly wintry feel, but he tried to warm us up with the promise of cheaper energy bills. As we reach for the thermostat, the UK government's gas strategy set out how to exploit so-called unconventional gas. These are deposits buried deep below the ground. However, pilot projects are coming under fire as people object to pipelines running underneath their homes, and concerns grow about the potential environmental impact, as Andrew Kerr has been finding out in Stirlingshire.
Dart Energy has been extracting coalbed methane at these test sites. They now want to expand the programme and have submitted a planning application.
I'm very excited about this resource. I've been in the business of gas for 30 years now, and watching the decline of the North Sea is concerning for me. I see the rest across Europe and have worked in other European countries. I'm delighted that we've got a resource that we can bring to continue with this country's progress and development.
The Chancellor, George Osborne, published his gas strategy alongside the autumn statement to make the best use of low-cost gas, so-called unconventional gas, such as coalbed methane and shale. Fracking is used for shale gas extraction, such as here in Lancashire. The controversial process uses high-pressure fluids and caused 2 earthquakes. That's not used to access coalbed methane. They drill 4,000 feet below the surface.
So this is well number 8 in the system. The company are keen to point out the wellhead is unobtrusive. It will pump the methane into a gas pipeline which is currently underused at the moment because of the decline in North Sea gas.
A key benefit about this exploration is the security of supply it could provide to the UK. That could keep prices stable and perhaps lower, as the Chancellor wants.
Additional gas from UK would add to security of supply, and I would think that the effect of shale gas and more coalbed methane gas would be more on the security of supply aspect, because we would have it available all the year round.
But despite assurances about health and safety from the company, local people are concerned. They've lodged objections to the planned development. Here in the village of Kinnaird, they say pipelines will pass under their homes. They've been backed in their objections by the nearby home builders and Network Rail. They want the developer to demonstrate there's no risk of damage or injury and what safety measures are in place to prevent the risk of explosion. Airth Community Council are having a meeting this week to hear objections.
Our concerns are about water, about the contamination of the water, about methane gas getting into the atmosphere, about how methane may very well percolate through the ground levels, and we feel that not enough has been done to raise awareness in the local area.
The application is licensed by the UK Government's Department for Energy. The local council decide on the planning, and the Scottish Environment Protection Agency makes sure their regulations are kept. The people here want the Scottish Government to intervene, but claim they have a hands-off approach. Ministers told us shale gases and coalbed methane are not included in our energy plans or in our national energy modelling. Environmental groups claim it's not needed in Scotland.
Unconventional gas extraction is very energy intensive and economically unviable unless the price of fossil fuels is really high. So it's not a cheap form of energy. But we don't need it anyway because we've got plentiful renewable resources in Scotland.
During these cold, dark days, cheaper bills would be welcome. But unlike North Sea oil and gas, these controversial new processes make some people feel they have a real impact on their lives.
Well, joining me now in the studio is the co-convener of the Scottish Green Party, Patrick Harvey, MSP, and in our Oxford studio, Labour's Shadow Energy Minister, the MP, Tom Greatrix. Thanks to you both for coming in. Tom, first of all, before we go into this in any detail, what do you think are the potential benefits?
Well, I think they're completely unproven, and that's the point with this, that we hear a lot in this debate and there's lots of excitable commentary on both sides, but actually we don't know what the potential actually is, and we're not going to ever know until we have a proper, robust regulatory system in place before people can have confidence for the exploration and potential extraction. So we just don't know. So some of the things that George Osborne was saying last week, or the commentary around what George Osborne was saying last week, I would say is misplaced.
But were you able to get the sort of reassurances you think that would make this a secure and safe supply? Is that something you think you could support?
Well, I think if the robust regulatory system is in place and with the right level of monitoring, I think then that doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't look to extract unconventional gas. But you know, let's be clear about this. That's got to be done. It's got to be done in the right order. So suggesting that activity could recommence before that proper regulatory processes are in place and properly developed, because as your film made clear, there are lots of different elements to this, and some responsibility for UK government departments, for the Health and Safety Executive, for Environment Agency in England and Wales and SEPA in Scotland, and also for local planning. And my colleague in the Scottish Parliament, Claire Baker, has done some work highlighting that planning departments of local authorities in Scotland are unclear about exactly where their responsibilities lie. So you need to clear all of that up and get that into a very clear place, to give some reassurance to those people who are quite rightly concerned about this, having seen things like Gasland and heard some of the poor experience in the US, before you allow activity to recommence in Lancashire or activity to recommence and commence in other places, including in Scotland.
Patrick, are there any reassurances at all that would persuade you that this is a good way to go?
Well, Tom's right that there are many question marks about the local environmental impacts, and with the UK government looking to create incentives to explore the possibility of this kind of extraction across something like 20,000 square kilometres in Scotland, it's likely that there would be different answers to that question in different parts of the country. But there's one thing that doesn't change, one factor in this that doesn't change, whether it's fracking, coal bed methane, or offshore unconventional oil extraction, would be adding to the stocks of fossil fuels in a way that is fundamentally reckless. The world already has many more times the level of known reserves of fossil fuels than we can afford to burn if we are remotely serious about climate change. And absolutely every member of the Scottish Parliament is supposed to be serious about climate change. We've voted for legislation which sets ambitious targets, and a new dash for gas will not only lock in dependence on gas for many more years, it will, I believe, take away from the momentum that's been built up around renewables investment in Scotland. That's the risk, that we'll end up not replacing coal with gas, but replacing renewables with gas and locking ourselves into dependence on it for many more years to come.
But Tom, if the prospect for the public is cheaper gas bills, particularly at this time, and also energy security, which is an increasingly problematic area, will that not actually tip a political balance here?
Well, I mean, I tend to agree with, I think it was Alec Kemp on your film, making the point about it's more likely to be around security of supply, actually, rather than price. It'll have, I think, in the UK, potentially have an impact, because, you know, we use a lot of gas in terms of heating, and despite moves to district heating schemes and, you know, more energy efficiency things, we're still going to need significant amounts of gas. And if we can have an indigenous supply as opposed to importing more, then that can be a good thing. I mean, I'm not sure I buy the argument from George Osborne about price, and that seems to be an extrapolation of the experience in the US, which I don't think is appropriate for the UK. So I think it's more to do with security of supply, but it may help to sort of stabilise the price or keep the price increases low. But you know, I have share some of the concerns that Patrick expressed about this sort of dash for gas and effectively locking us into overall, and leaving fracking and coal bed methane to one side, overall leaving us in a position where we're overly dependent on gas, and then you know, whatever the projections are in terms of price, we're then subject to the volatilities of that world market price, which may well be going up rather than going down. And certainly the experience of the last few years is that gas prices have gone up, and that's fed through to consumer bills. That's caused a degree of the concern that we've spoken about before.
But in terms of what you're talking about, renewables and the potential effect on renewables, could it not be argued that gas is the least worst of the fossil fuels and actually could have a transitional role into supporting renewables and maintaining a base load at a critically important time?
I think pretty much everyone accepts that gas does have a transitional role, that for a period of time we will continue to need some element of gas on the grid. Even the UK government's Climate Change Committee, the independent advisors to both governments on climate change, accept some need for gas. But they're very concerned that the UK government are building in far too much gas into their assumptions about the future. And although the Scottish government, as we saw in your clip there, says that unconventional gas doesn't figure in their models, they've consistently refused to rule out supporting unconventional gas extraction in Scotland. Under questioning at committee and in the chamber, Fergus Ewing, the Energy Minister, has refused to echo any of the objections that local communities or the environmental movement have about this technology. If we build in too much gas, we will still bust the climate targets. We won't be able to achieve that trajectory. We do need some gas on the grid, but that needs to be on a declining trajectory and declining as quickly as possible. In Scotland, we can do that really quickly with the growth of renewables, and we must avoid any risk to the momentum around renewables investment.
Okay. Well, Tom, Patrick's there talking about the responses from local communities and environmental groups, but do you think some of this actually in the public domain has been a little bit under the radar? It's interesting today, a couple of the papers here are leading with this sort of dash for gas story and potential problems there, but it hasn't had a huge public profile so far. Are you surprised by that?
I am, to be frank. I mean, it's something that I've been looking at and talking about for almost a year now in terms of looking at some of the things that need to happen in relation to this. So, but I suppose that the trigger has been the gas strategy, although I wouldn't really call it a gas strategy. It's really a couple of scenarios and then some hopes built in around it. But I think this is, if you're ever going to use this technology or this technology to be used, apart from making sure those regulatory things are in place, there needs to be public understanding and public confidence, and you're not going to get that until people understand the issues around it and are able to make a balanced judgment on those. And that's something a reason why you'd welcome a wider debate on it.
Yeah, Patrick, do you agree that potentially vast areas of Scotland could be involved here, but it does seem to have been a bit muted, the debate, for the general public? Is that the case?
Yes, I think a very large number of people maybe had heard something about this if they've got an interest in climate change or energy policy, but most people will have heard nothing. And the huge swathes of Central Belt Scotland, very heavily populated areas, which are potentially under threat of this kind of development, it's clearly going to be something which creates a great many more communities like the one we've seen in your film, who experience this as a very immediate threat and find that with UK government, potentially Scottish government, both lining up in favour of the technology, and local planners not really able to make use of the climate change argument that SEPA have included in their guidance, because it won't be for the local planners to be able to prove that this is going to be a threat to renewables as opposed to coal. It's going to be very, very hard for those communities to marshal a successful argument unless the Scottish Government is willing to change its position and come out and accept that with this vast renewable potential, Scotland does not need unconventional gas.
Patrick Harvey, Tom Greatrix, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.